Hello, I'm Dr. Jeffrey Becker, a Mediterranean archaeologist based at Binghamton University, the State University of New York in the United States. At Binghamton, I'm a university lecturer teaching courses in Mediterranean archaeology, classical studies, and art history, mostly to undergraduate students. In my research, I'm concerned mostly with topics related to Roman architecture and urbanism in the Roman world, particularly the Italian peninsula during the first millennium BC, in addition to applications of Mediterranean archaeology in the digital humanities. Today, I'll be talking about archaeology in the forum, material culture confronts the historical tradition, in order to examine the ways in which archaeology and history intersect in order to better understand a place of fundamental importance in the landscape of ancient Rome. What is archaeology and why does it matter? Archaeology is the study of the human past via material remains. By recording and analyzing artifacts and ecofacts, archaeologists are able to reconstruct lifeways or patterns of living of past human populations. And in collecting this material, to assemble and interpret what is known as the archaeological record, in which the examination of material culture remains plays a large role. In archaeology, context is king. Context is the most important piece of archaeological data that we can hope to recover, and it involves much more than simply indicating the place of discovery of an archaeological object. Rather, context is a set of relational information that tells us about the sequence of events at any place in time in the past, as well as the relative activities that have occurred in any given location. As you can see from the diagram on the screen, of an urban archaeological context, the accumulation of layers of use and disuse at an archaeological site form in and of themselves a documentary record, the examination of which is relates to the field known as stratigraphy. The reading of the stratigraphic record is, in a way, the reading of a documentation of the past, not documented in words, but rather documented in the material traces and impacts of human activity. In this regard, the archaeological record and the historical record are fundamentally different. The historian tends to focus on noteworthy episodes relevant to a culture or a people in order to write a document that records the sequence of notable events, whereas the archaeological record tends to record all events, whether notable or terribly mundane. The archaeological record has the potential to capture and preserve those events in sequence. Just like the preservation of text is a challenge, so too the preservation of the archaeological record often suffers from fragmentation, destruction, partial obliteration, making our job of reading the sequence of past events challenging. For this reason, a contextualized approach to archaeology often brings to bear as much evidence as possible. And for this reason, in particular, in the context of the ancient Mediterranean, the combined forces of archaeological records and historical records can make the interpretation of past time more fruitful, more nuanced, and more contextualized. A useful case study for a brief consideration of the intersection of archaeological method and historical tradition is provided by the Forum Romanum, the sacro-civic square at the center of Rome. The Forum, as a long-term civic center, provides a wealth of opportunities to examine not just the sequence of archaeological events, but to relate those to material derived from the textual tradition. Any interpretation of any data, of course, has to be approached with care, caution, and even skepticism. But the Forum is an example of a location where we profit greatly from an integrated approach, bringing to bear as much data as is available to answer questions about not just the happenings that took place in the Forum Square, but of the physical and urban development of the square itself. The Forum Romanum refers to the area located in the valley between the Capitoline and Palatine Hills in the center of Rome. And from an early period, that is the Archaic period, the Forum will become the putative center of the city, both spatially and also ideologically. The Capitoline and Palatine Hills are, of course, connected to the foundation of the city and the key cult places of the state religion. And the valley between them, originally a space of burial and not of centralization, requires modification in order to be made more serviceable in the Archaic period. One reason that this outlying valley is not used for permanent activity in the Archaic period is that it is prone to surface flooding. And as you can see from the diagram on the screen, the Tiber River tends in years and in times of flood to back up in the floodplain between the Capitoline and the Palatine Hills, causing the Forum Valley to become wet for at least a portion of the year, certainly impacting its serviceability as a community center or a public square. Thus, activities undertaken in Rome's Archaic period seek to improve the serviceability and usability of the Forum Valley through a landfill project, a project undertaken according to the historical tradition by Rome's early kings and remembered in a comment in this passage of the historian Livy, where Roman citizens are lamenting the labors that they have to perform in order to dig in the earth in order to channelize water and to create building foundations and the like. This comment in Livy is very useful in that it may well align with what archaeology has shown us about the Valley of the Forum. In particular, the late 19th and early 20th century fieldwork of Giacomo Boni, seen here at left, a pioneering excavator of the Forum Valley, demonstrated that a sequence of artificial landfill layers, as you can see in the diagram at the far right, were deposited in the Forum Valley during the Archaic time period. And later 20th century work undertaken by Albert Ammermann served to confirm and expand Boni's understanding of the landfill project in the Forum Valley. Something that is very useful and interesting to the archaeologist and historian alike, in that the elite mobilization of manpower, resources, and material to create a monumental civic center is a useful and important indication of not just the early phases of urban centralization, but also of the presence of a social hierarchy at the site of Rome, remembered in Livy as activities of Rome's early monarchs. Those landfill works, as well as other work over time, caused the Forum Valley to develop by stages into essentially a bounded space, not one that is completely or even particularly regular in its arrangement, but nonetheless, the concept of an open central area bounded at the extremes by architecture is what informs the process of the formation of the Forum Valley. As you can see here in this reconstruction from an overhead perspective, at the end of the 3rd century BC, we can see the area of the Forum at the center, bounded by architecture effectively on all sides. At this stage, taking care to leave the central space open for purposes of assembly, of entertainments, and other needs for congregation in the space of the Forum Square. This landscape that we are looking at here on the reconstructed view is not just a landscape of practicality, one in which political, sacred, and commercial business is transacted. It is also a landscape of memory. And this role as landscape of memory is an important layer in understanding the nature of the Forum Romanum itself, from its earliest beginnings to its latest use. And the sort of long-standing um, importance of the Forum and its monuments is reason for us to search out the reasons that the various locations connected to the phases of the city's development are connected to key places, key touchstones, or hotspots of memory in the valley of the Forum itself. If we take a look at the area of the northwest corner of the Forum Romanum, the area connected with the so-called Curia, the Senate House of the Roman Republic, and the Comitium, the place of popular assembly, we can see one instance where a hotspot of memory in this architecturalized landscape is of particular importance for the topography of the Forum, but also relevant to the question of how archaeology and history can profitably work together in order to interpret the past. The space of the Curia and the Comitium undergoes a number of changes and modifications by period, such that the current phase that is visible bears little to no resemblance to the earliest phases of the use of this area. The early stages of the Curia Comitium area involve parts of the political process, with the Curia being the headquarters of the Senate and the Comitium being the place of popular assembly, as well as sacred overtones, with a cult place that is sacred to the god Vulcan also being located in this area. The Curia and Comitium, in addition to being a place of politicking and of sacrifice, are also a place of ranked social display, whereby the high-ranking Romans belonging to the so-called patrician class use this district of the Forum in order to reinforce their position atop the social hierarchy. As a place of memory, the area of the Curia and the Comitium are also thought by ancient Romans to be connected to the founding figure of the city of Rome, namely Romulus. The Romulus episode that relates to the northwest corner of the Forum Valley most likely pertains to the episode at the end of Romulus's life, which exists in a couple of different versions in the historical tradition, but all of which seem to agree that, or most of which seem to agree, that Romulus leaves the earth and goes on to become a god, as this drawing of the death and apotheosis of Romulus suggests. And as Livy records that Romulus was enveloped in a cloud and was thus no longer seen anymore on the earth, making the sort of change of state to become a divine being. Now, an area in the front of the Comitium, perhaps connected with the ancient cult place of Vulcan, was known in antiquity, even in the historical period in the late Republican era, as a special location, and came to be marked as such with a special pavement earning it the name of lapis niger, the black rock or black stone, an intentional act in the paving of the Forum in the late Republic that set a special area with a different pavement and a stone balustrade off from the rest of the Forum, which at that same time was paved in white travertine, as you see here. And as Festus, the late source, comments, the black stone, the comitium, indicates a place associated with death because the death of Romulus is assigned to it. Now, Giacomo Boni, whom we mentioned before, in his early 20th century excavations of this quarter, was part of revealing what lies beneath the pavement of the Lapis Niger, namely a sacred and cultic area that includes altars and votive deposits, as well as monumental commemorations of what are clearly early phases of the city's history. One of these monuments dedicated at the Lapis Niger is an inscription in archaic Latin, as you can see here on the screen, recording things to do with a king and things having to do with sacred law, perhaps marking this as a place of commemoration, or even perhaps a place of veneration. Certainly, there's a case to be made that perhaps Romulus is one object of the veneration here in the area of the Lapis Niger. A recent and ongoing fieldwork undertaken in the space in front of the Curia building has revealed new evidence, as well as revealed previously discovered evidence. In fact, you can see here in this photograph the area of the Lapis Niger with the altars and votive areas at a lower stratigraphic horizon beneath it. So you're thinking here in the area where the tourists are about the late Republic, more or less at this ground level, and the early Republic and even earlier at the area where the archaeologists are standing down here in the trench. In this very year of 2020, the re-exposure of finds that had been made by Giacomo Boni reignited questions about the historicity of this spot and the part played by the mytho-historic tradition in the archaeology of the early city. Because beneath the steps of the later Curia building that is still standing on the site, and you can see that here in cross-section, a rock-cut chamber was exposed that originally had been discovered in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but has now become the focus of a sort of a new wave of attention about whether or not this rock-cut room, which contains a seemingly empty stone sarcophagus, is a place dedicated to the veneration of Romulus or some other founder figure. This hypogeum, meaning underground chamber, has been interpreted preliminarily by the Archaeological Service in Rome as some kind of heroon, a hero shrine of Romulus. It's even been suggested that the sarcophagus is intended as a cenotaph, an intentionally empty tomb to commemorate the connection between this spot in the Forum and the supposed death and apotheosis of Romulus as founder figure. And you can see that in the scan on the right, that the chamber is directly beneath the late Republican foundations of the Curia of the Roman Senate. And of course, this position is probably not an accident, and it's perhaps likely that this chamber, if it is meant as a cult room or a place of veneration, occupies some important place in the sacred landscape of the Forum Valley, and indeed of the collective memory of the citizens of Rome. This is an interesting episode in that it gives us an opportunity to consider the role played by mytho-history in the formation of the urban center, and the value of the Forum Valley, which you see here again reconstructed in about 200 BC, the value of the Forum Valley in serving as a touchstone of such memories, that these locations, some monumentalized, others not, help to create a rich tapestry whereby shared and collective notions about identity can be displayed and reinforced, not just in the immediate time, but in some cases across long stretches of time, whereby visible features, even of a half millennium prior, are still visible in the Forum and are still meaningful in terms of the reconstruction of shared collective consciousness about what it is to be a Roman and what Rome as a place means. The debate that we have among ourselves as postmodern analysts of this material often centers on questions of whether or not figures like Romulus were quote unquote real people or not. And in some cases, that issue is of secondary importance. If we think about this as a contextualized reading of antiquity, we're forced to concede that the memory value of the spots in the landscape is not diminished if the person remembered is in fact a mythical figure. In other words, the mytho-historical tradition plays a role in manifesting meaning and identity in contemporary times for historical Romans, and that's the point of this kind of commemorative landscape, and that's the point to maintain these linkages to past time, is that they play a valuable part in helping to reaffirm and re-up the ways in which Rome came to be and how Romans are all connected together. The Forum as a square and as an architecturalized landscape will continue to change and develop. Here, an idea of the northwest corner of the Forum Square around the death of the Emperor Augustus in the year 14. Even as building projects change the sort of the visual landscape, the aesthetic landscape of the Forum, its memory landscape and its value as a place of shared and collective consciousness is not changed, and in fact only becomes deeper as time goes on. This is a point at which the intersectionality of textual records and archaeological records can be very useful in terms of making an interpretation that is sort of fulsome and takes on board as much evidence as possible. The Forum serves as the backdrop for civic and sacred life, where Romans gather, where Romans participate in the political process, where they participate in or witness sacrifice, where they participate in or witness funeral speeches. It is a collective space. It is an active and conscious space where Romans are reminded of their identity and of their links, not just to one another, but their links to the landscape of this urban place that is at the center of their world. The Forum at Rome is, in a way, an extensible concept, in that the Forum can be used as a parable to understand Roman culture writ large, not just in central Italy, but across the Mediterranean world. And as such, we're at pains to interpret it and analyze it by bringing as much evidence as is available to us to bear on these questions of what is the Forum and why is it important and why is it so durable as a center. And one of those reasons for its durability is its role as a generator of identity and memory, a phenomenon in which the combination of archaeological and historical data enables us to read at least a significant fraction of the record and arrive at an understanding of why the Forum as place and as concept is so central to Roman culture. Thank you for your attention.